Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score, part two, the second show of the week. As Jacob and I teased, we are excited to do this one because it's a look ahead to your fantasy football playoff matchups. I mean, look, some of you play in leagues where the playoffs start next week and run all the way through week 18. But as I've said before on the mailbag pod, and I'll say again, I don't take those leagues all that seriously. Get your commissioner to change the playoffs and not have them run through week 18 where teams are on bye because they've clinched playoff spots. And for most of you, the playoffs start this week, and we don't want to waste any time. No long intro this week. We want to get right into it, right into matchups, right into team-by-team advanced stats that can help you set your lineups, make your waiver claims tonight, and give you an edge for these fantasy playoffs. So without further ado, Jacob, turn it over to you.
I just want to say I'm so excited when I hear part two. Let's go. Yeah, we're going to go team by team and then dive into some like position by position, start sit kind of stuff. I hope we have time at the end to do flex conversations. I think that'll be really interesting and like look at different type of leagues and stuff. We'll just see where we're at with time. But I don't think this should take too long. I prepared all the team by team stuff ahead of time. So we did this a couple weeks ago, and I do just want to point out, like, comment, all that. But also, if you have any feedback on this specifically, like this team by team breakdown, I would love to hear it. Put that in the comments because I'm curious if it's worth it, basically. I don't know if there's much content like this where it's like just giving you all the data for every single team every single week. And I think that could be really cool if we like find a niche for it, but we'll see. So just let us know what you think. All right, at the top, Arizona Cardinals. We're going alphabetically. 32% first read target rate per fantasy points data. Almost all of this information is going to be per fantasy points data. 32% first read target rate for both Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride this past week. I just wanted to point that out because I would have expected McBride's to be much, much higher. McBride has been seeing massive target shares lately, but they have the same first read target rate. Over the past month, Marvin Harrison Jr. has a 21% target share and a 45% air yardage share. Those are good, not quite great, but good numbers. 8 targets per game for Marvin Harrison Jr. over the past month, 6 catchable targets per game. So pretty good job for Kyler Murray, considering a lot of these targets are coming down the field. Nearly 70 catchable air yards per game. That's pretty strong. I just wanted to start there because I think it's clear what McBride's doing. You know, he's getting like 14 targets every single week, whereas the MHJ results have been a bit disappointing. The underlying usage, though, is pretty strong, and I think he has some matches he can win. So we're going to get into rankings later, and you'll see where I have him. I think he's somebody you can go to. James Conner, 49% route rate. So he ran a route on about half of the dropbacks for Arizona. That's pretty good. 76% RB rush share for Conner over the past month is pretty good. I think, he got the extension. I think as long they're contending for the playoffs, as long as he's healthy, he's the guy who's going to have most of this backfield to himself. Atlanta Falcons, 31% first read target rate for Ray McLeod last week, 23% for Darnell Mooney, only 19% for Drake London, 19% for Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts turned 6 targets and an end zone target into 1 catch for 14 yards. We've got to be done with him. I'm sure most of you are well past that, but some of us have struggled to come to that realization. Over the past month, we've got a 32% first read target share for Drake London. Mooney got a bit banged up during that time, so his is down a little bit, but I think, London is clearly the 1A in this offense. He has over 70 catchable air yards per game over the past month. I think things are really going to continue to funnel through him. I don't necessarily trust what we've seen from Kirk Cousins, but over 70 catchable air yards per game is a solid number. Baltimore Ravens coming off the bye. Over the past month, there's been a lot of volume for Zay Flowers, but a lot of it has been uncatchable. I was actually really encouraged when I saw his underlying volume rates, and then looking at the catchable air yards showed why that hasn't translated to huge production. Only 132 out of 309 air yards over the past month have been catchable. Only 3.7 of his targets out of a 7 target per game average over the past month have been catchable for Zay Flowers. I think we'll see better, accuracy from Lamar. I think that's him running. That's the low end of his range of outcomes. But I mean, would you agree that Lamar just kind of hasn't quite been the same lately? Like this happens for Zay and him sometimes, I feel like.
I think it's clear from what I've seen. Now it could be matchup based. They've played the Eagles defense. They've played some tougher defenses, obviously. But from what I saw, just breaking down that Eagles tape when we went over it last week, there were issues with ball placement and issues with timing in the passing game between Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers, among other receivers. So I think something might be a little off right now there.
I'm really glad you brought up the Eagles matchup because these aren't the catchable target shares aren't so straightforward. Catchable targets, catchable air yards, all that. That's not only a quarterback stat. That's a defense stat. That's a wide receiver stat. Like, is the receiver getting open? Are they able to get open because of separation and stuff like that? So that's definitely good context to bring up. But yeah, I think it's good to see Zay getting these types of air yards. Sometimes he gets limited into just the catch and run role, and who knows what we see out of the bye. They might kind of start doing that. It fluctuates with him game to game. But when he has the big air yards, and that gives him the potential to sneak into that top 12 receiver range, which he often doesn't finish in. But I mean, if you've got one of the best offenses in the NFL and he's seeing 20, 30% target share, 40% air yardage share, that's the recipe for big scores. And he's definitely talented enough to give big scores. We'll see what happens against the Giants. I don't know how much they're going to need to throw down the field. Mark Andrews, his route rate has been between 57 and 61% each of the past 3 games with Isaiah Likely back. Fantasy points data says that Mark Andrews has caught every single end zone target that he's received this year, which is hard to believe. But he's a big dude. He's good at football. And yeah, that's been really, you've run really hot with him. If you have him in fantasy, given the role that he's played, I would have to guess. It's not even a guess. I saw this earlier in the year. He's exceeded expectations relative to expected fantasy points more than any tight end other than Taysom Hill. And so like I wouldn't want to trust him, but the Ravens definitely could score touchdowns. So just wanted to point that out. He's the DeAndre Hopkins of tight ends. Isaiah Likely has the second highest first read target rate on that same note on the team over the past month. So above Mark Andrews. And then Rashad Bateman is expected back this week. So really for me, it's just Zay Flowers is the only one I would want to trust. Buffalo Bills, big day for Khalil Shakir, but he actually only had a 16% first read target rate, which surprised me a little bit. They really, really pushed the ball down the field, which makes sense. They fell into a huge hole early. 44% first read target share for Amari Cooper. Over the past month, we've got a 27% rate for Shakir compared to 21% for Amari. 42% air yardage share for Amari Cooper over the past month. So huge upside, like we talked about with Adam on Monday's show. 17-yard average depth of target for Amari Cooper over the past month, which typically is going to make it really hit or miss for players that are seeing such volatile downfield looks. But he actually has a surprisingly high catchable target rate of 65%. 65% of his targets over the past month have been catchable. So, Josh Allen's really good. For reference, like Khalil Shakir's is 73%, and Amari Cooper's ADOT is like 5 times higher than his.
Yeah.
So Cooper could go nuts any given week, especially this week against Detroit in a potential shootout. But it is definitely a really wide range of outcomes that you're playing with if you do start him. Speaking of wide range outcomes, James Cook has really kind of turned into that kind of a player. He can just lose out in games when the Bills fall behind, or really if it just gets into like kind of a high paced game. They're clear like lean on. I remember Gretsch said on our Beyond the Box Score a month ago that like they think Ty Johnson's the best passing downs back in the NFL, and that's how this backfield gets treated. Over the Cook. The other thing is his running back rush shares have kind of been all over the place lately. Some games they get Ray Davis involved as well, and so it's really, I don't know, like it's hard. Like this matchup, they won by a lot of points, and so Cook didn't play as much because Ray Davis played more. But in this matchup, they were losing by a lot of points, so Cook didn't play as much because Ty Johnson played more. Like he's tough to trust. There's definitely upside with him, but he only has 3 targets per game with the past month. Only one of those was a designed target. Early in the year, they were designing him stuff, but that's kind of dropped off. There's upside. Good luck with him, but like his route rate is about like Najee Harris, David Montgomery range.
He's back to kind of the same player he was before Brady took over.
Yeah.
And then Brady took over, made it a concerted effort to get him the football. And like you said, the biggest drop off I think is in the passing game.
Yeah, which is frustrating.
Yeah,
That I
he's a
thought was
weapon.
kind of the thesis with Cook as a prospect. I thought he could be that kind of guy.
Same.
Carolina Panthers, 41% first read target share for Adam Thielen, 27% for Xavier Legette. Legette is averaging 7 targets and over 100 air yards per game over the past month, with nearly 2/3 of those air yards being catchable. So he definitely could have spike weeks. Obviously, this past game was really frustrating in terms of some of the drops. Did he get banged up? I didn't see him. I didn't
I
see
didn't
anything
see
when I.
anything on that. I know Coker's still not a guarantee to come back.
Yeah. But yeah, it's really all about Thielen right now. At least
Yep.
9 catchable targets each of the past 2 games, between 87 and 92 catchable air yards each of the past two
Wow.
games. So Bryce Young is playing a lot better, and Thielen he's seeing the role that he saw last year, but the offense is playing better. And so really, I think he's basically like a top 20 receiver at this point. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's just a 2-game sample size, but only Puka Nacua, Trey McBride, and David Njoku have more catchable targets than Adam Thielen over the past
Wow.
couple weeks. So it's been really, really good. And then Chuba Hubbard gets everything. He had the highest route rate of any running back last week. I think I have an RB10, RB11 overall this week. Chicago Bears, 44% first read target share for DJ Moore, 28% for Roma Dunze, 22% for Keenan Allen. DJ Moore's average depth of target dropped back down 4.5 yards this week. He had been really low for 2 straight games, and then spiked last week. And then this past week, it was back down under 5 yards. So it's tough for him to have much upside, obviously, with the offense barely producing anything, but especially if he's not getting downfield looks. Odunze was really the only one with air yards this week. 46 of his 75 air yards were catchable, which is technically an improvement in terms of the rate. But yeah, you don't really want any of these guys. 82% route rate for Cole Kmet, which is good theoretically, but I just don't think you want any of these guys. Over the past month, 119 out of 230 air yards are catchable for DJ Moore. So
Wow.
right around half.
I think I saw that Odunze has the least.
Odunze is the
percentage.
worst. Yeah. It's
In
him
the
and Calvin
NFL.
Ridley. Yeah.
It's crazy. I'm gonna pack more Caleb Williams this offseason with you and just watch more film on him and see what the deal is like. I'm hopeful that a new coordinator and a new system and a new everything will make a difference, but I've seen quarterbacks build bad habits that are hard to break from.
For sure. Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. Him and Odunze, especially Odunze, I think are two of the toughest to evaluate
Yeah.
at this point in the year.
And it's 2 years in a row. Just to note, last thing about Caleb, it's 2 years in a row of really bad offensive line play from his final year at USC
Yeah.
to now with the Bears.
That is a good long-term note in terms of him maybe having some habits that are
Yep.
not so good because of this. Yeah. 131 out of 405 air yards have been catchable for Odunze over the past month. So you'll notice, I'm typically pointing out when it's above or well above half, he's not even close to half. It's really, really been bad. Keenan Allen has 232 out of 335 air yards catchable over the past month. So he has more catchable air yards over the past month than DJ Moore has total air yards over the past month. I don't know. That's just not what you'd expect. That's kind of a role reversal for those two guys. If I had to trust one, I think I would trust Keenan at this point.
Yeah, maybe slightly. I don't think I trust either.
Yeah. Cincinnati Bengals, 50% first read target rate for Jamar Chase this week. Wow. We never get that. It's been when him and T. Higgins are both healthy, it's been T. Higgins who's been the guy getting more targets. But this week it was nope, we're feeding Jamar. He's going for the Triple Crown. He's going for historic numbers here potentially this year. And so
I saw him also mention post game that they were playing a lot more man than he expected. The Cowboys. Not sure if a lot of teams are going to do that moving forward.
that's a good call. That's a good call for sure. I have an absolutely insane stat on Joe Burrow. Jamar and T. Higgins both rank top 5 in catchable air yards over the past month, and they've only played 3 games, so one fewer than the rest of these guys. 93% of T. Higgins' air yards have been catchable over the past month.
Yep.
So 50% is the number we've been looking for. Odunze's was 30%, 93. What the heck?
Yep. I could say that honestly, just to jump in for a second, in week 10, I cut up all of Joe Burrow's film on all 20+ yard throws. I put it on Twitter today above that post where you mentioned that stat, Jacob. I said it then, and I'll say it again. There is no better deep ball passer in the NFL. Not Mahomes, not Herbert, not any of these talented throwers of the ball. Josh Allen. No one is a better deep ball thrower. And the reason being is because of what you just said. He throws a catchable football. He throws it with anticipation. He leads the receiver into space, and the ball placement is always on point, almost always, 93% of the time with Higgins. So that makes a difference. That's the reason why you want, we keep seeing all these huge passing games from the Bengals.
QB2 in fantasy points over the past calendar year, behind only Lamar Jackson per game.
Without running.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely insane. Chase Brown, RB8 in expected fantasy points last week, RB3 over the past month. So, yep, continue to start him.
I was a little worried early they were mixing in Khalil Herbert. I was like, oh boy, because I have Brown in so many leagues. I was like, oh boy, this is finally happening. And then, nope, once the game got cleared, they kind of just gave him a little bit of work early. And then any key spot, Brown was in the game.
They're so likely to get into a back and forth passing game on any given week because the defense is so bad. And when you do that, it's Chase Brown time, and he's going to have like 6 or 8 targets. He's just super, super valuable for fantasy right now. Cleveland Browns, 36% first read target rate for David Njoku. That's back-to-back games above 30%. Prior to that, his rate had been pretty low. So I don't know if Cedric Tillman is influencing that. Like maybe because Tillman's out, Elijah Moore is running deeper routes, and so there's more stuff going to Njoku in the short area because he doesn't have any competition there. But they're scheming more stuff to Njoku lately, which is more in line with what we've seen in the past when Deshaun Watson hasn't been at QB. So I think you can continue to trust him. He has 2 end zone targets in this game, has 7 end zone targets over the past 4 games. No one else on the team has more than 2. That's another area where Tillman's return could affect things, but it's been really, really good underlying usage for him lately. Like he's right there with Kelsey and the rest of those guys. 36% first read target rate for him, 20% for Jerry Jeudy. I was a little surprised that it wasn't higher after his massive game against Denver. 12% for Elijah Moore. Jerry Jeudy leads the NFL in catchable air yards over the past month. Dallas Cowboys, 33% first read target rate for CeeDee Lamb, 28% for Jake Ferguson, 74% route rate for Jake Ferguson in his first game back. That's good. That's like top 10, top 12 range. The offense isn't good enough to necessarily support that from him in terms of like turning that into points. But, in a PPR league, you could do worse. Rico Dowdle had a 60% route rate. That was by far his highest mark of the season. It was his first time over 50%. He still only had 2 targets, but targets could come if he's out there running routes more often. There's not a whole lot else to throw to. But also, everything is short for CeeDee Lamb right now, so I don't know if they will be checking down a lot because, so everything's short for Lamb, everything's short for Ferguson. First 3 target rate for CeeDee Lamb over the past month, 30%. That's good, but it's not elite, especially when it's such a low ADOT. I would have expected it to be like 40 or 45%, but obviously defenses know that he's the whole offense, so they're trying to take it away. But yeah, only a 6-yard average depth of target for Lamb over the past month. 23% target share overall. He's averaging 8.8 targets per game over the past month. The Cowboys are just throwing a ton. So if his target share doesn't rise, which I think it should, that the targets and receptions could drop if the Cowboys offense doesn't keep producing so many pass attempts, which could happen if they just can't keep producing first downs. But it's actually been a more functional offense than I expected because Dowdle has played really well. And you hit on this a couple of weeks ago, the run game is gelling better than it has in a long, long time. Do you have any more notes on that? Did you watch them last night?
Yeah, just from watching last night, it was clear. I mean, Dowdle on a per touch basis was super efficient. The blocking looked really good on the interior specifically. They had a little scare with Tyler Smith going down, but he came back into the game. So I think that's fine. And I think they figured out that that's a good way to run their offense, at least with Cooper Rush. So should open opportunities. I still watching that game feels so man, and I have Lamb on so many teams because it's how I built my auction rosters, but through Lamb. But I still get the feeling, Jacob, that I could be looking back at one of these playoff matchups and he has 4 points, and I'm like, this is not surprising at all. He didn't get that random red zone touchdown. It just feels like this is not a wide receiver 1 right now.
Yeah, I feel that way about everyone in this offense. Really, you can start these guys. I really would feel
Dowdle. I think Dowdle is worth starting.
I would feel so much better if he was getting targets. It just scares me. It's like a run only guy on a bad offense scares me. But yeah, the run game has really been working. That's backed up in the stats. If you look at on the year, percentage of runs that gain positive yardage, Rico Dowdle is number one. Percentage of runs that gain 3 or more yards, number one. 5 or more yards, number two, behind only Bijan Robinson. It's been a really surprisingly effective year for Rico Dowdle. Denver Broncos had a bye, but still some notes to bring up here because they have been one of the best offenses over the second half of the season here. Devon Vele, still only a 57% route rate in their last game. That's right where he's been over the past month. He has a 23% first read target share, and he's looked good and helped the offense. So, like, I thought maybe he might just kind of continue to get more and more involved, but the overall route rate does make him sort of hard to trust because there might be games where he just has like 3 or 4 targets. But when he's in there, they do design things to him. Cortland Sutton over the past month has a 28% first read target rate, 25% target share overall, 45% air yardage share. So those are all really, really good numbers. That's like Mike Evans kind of role. 266 of his 359 air yards have been catchable over the past month. That's really good as well. He's an end zone target machine. I think Evans is really the comp. I don't think he's as good as Evans, but he's playing really well. It's a similar type of role for him. So he's been, unless it's a bad matchup, he's like top 12, top 15 receiver for me most weeks. Detroit Lions, 25% first read target share for Jamison Williams this past game, 22% for Sam Laporta, only 16% for Amon-Ra St. Brown. That is really uncharacteristic, obviously. So this is the number of games where he has had a first read target share below 20%. In 2022, none out of 15 games. Every single game was above 20%. 2023, only 1 out of 16 games was below 20%. In 2024, he's been below 20% in 3 out of 13 games. It's not a real concern. Like the volume is better than AJ Brown, for example, but games like these can kind of creep up on you, which is just scary. I don't know if it really matters that much. Nobody's benching him. But like for DFS and stuff like that, I do think he's overvalued. He's just not really the guy he's been. And I think that's mostly a Jamison Williams thing. And then they're also getting Sam Laporta more involved lately. So over the past month, 27% first read target share for St. Brown, 24% for Jamison Williams. Those are really close. 18% for Sam Laporta, in only including the games that he played. That is up from earlier in the year when it was like 11 or 12%. I do think they're trying to get him more involved, and he's somebody you can trust if you have to. Dan, who has more air yards over the past month, Jamison Williams or Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Nah, just based on the way you frame that, I'm going to go with Jamison Williams.
Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't know. That shocked me because their targets are pretty close, but like I think that's mostly a stat about like the way they're using Jamison Williams is much different than you might expect. Yep. He does get some deep looks and run some deep routes for sure.
Mostly those overs, those intermediate overs, though.
Yeah. Which I think gives him a bit of a higher floor than people might expect.
Agreed.
Green Bay Packers, last game, 40% first read target share for Dontavian Wicks, 30% for Christian Watson, 20% for Tucker Kraft, 10% for Jaden Reed. Some nice even numbers here because the passing volume is so low. 22% first read target rate for Jaden Reed over the past month. I think we're going to see that probably shoot up in week 15. Matt LaFleur is talking about, wanting to get him more involved. So we'll see on that. I'm definitely going to be watching to see if he plays in 2 receiver sets. Did you see that quote about getting him to play wide receiver more?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm guessing that it might mean that.
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah. Because he is a wide receiver. I thought that's what he's been playing, but maybe he means like out wide. We'll see. That would be huge.
Instead of special teams, or he might mean boundary. Yeah.
Yeah. Over the past month, 277 out of 378 air yards have been catchable for Christian Watson. That's a really high rate. Jordan Love is good. Christian Watson's been separating really well, and Matt LaFleur is a really good schemer. Watson is the only one with over 150 air yards over the past month, which is 3 games for the Packers. So, yeah, Wicks' ADOT has been down. Jane Reed is not getting hardly any air yards. It's really just been.
I got Watson ready to roll in one of my most important league, and I'm ready to get burned.
Yeah, me too. Houston Texans were on bye. Over the past month, though, we've got a 34% first read target rate for Nico Collins. I think he's locked in here with 3 exciting matchups as a league winner for you, hopefully. 18% for Dalton Schultz over the past month, only 16% first read target rate for Tank Dell over the past month. So that is not what you want to see. He actually does have more air yards than Nico during that time because he has an 18-yard average depth of target. So that's going to make things really hit or miss. Like we talked about on last week's podcast, like CJ almost hit him on that like 70-yard in the air throw. But the timing just wasn't quite there. And that's, maybe he comes down with one of those and wins you your week. Or maybe he gives you 2, he could give you 2. You've gotten lots of 2s from him this year. But for what it's worth, over the past month, 150 out of 273 air yards have been catchable. So I honestly think Stroud's playing fine. But it's just, he's a Christian Watson kind of guy in terms of range of outcomes with the usage that he has here. The only other note was that Joe Mixon has a 13% first read target rate over the past month, which is almost as high as Tank and Dalton Schultz. It's almost second on the team, which is unusual for a running back. The Texans are really just being intentional about getting the ball into his hands any way that they can. Indianapolis Colts, the team that was on bye, 29% first read target rate for Michael Pittman over the past month. Josh Downs did play in 2 of those games. So you don't want to be starting any of these guys, I don't think. But for what it's worth, all 3 of the receivers do have a catchable air yardage rate above 50% over the past month. I do think Anthony Richardson's playing better. So there is potential for one of these guys to run into a decent game. But yeah, if you can avoid them, I would. Jacksonville Jaguars, 47% first read target rate for Brian Thomas Jr., 70%.
How high will we go with ranking Brian Thomas Jr.?
We're going to find out here in about 15 minutes. 70% first read target rate for BTJ in the second half. He had 9 targets in the second half. Evan Ingram had 2. Parker Washington had 1. Devin Duvernay had 1. So 9 of 13 targets for the team went to BTJ. He caught 8 of those 9 targets for 86 yards. He's absolutely unstoppable. His past 3 games, his first read target rate is 47%, 29%, 29%. Those are 3 of his 5 highest games on the year. It's happening, dude. It's, we talked with Ben Gretsch about like maybe he just kind of takes over at the end of the year, a la AJ Brown rookie season, those are really high rates for somebody who's running such deep routes. So it's really exciting for him. Only a 21% first read target rate for Evan Ingram over the past month. I thought that number would be higher. He seems healthy. His route rate checks out and everything. So maybe it will climb as the season goes along here at the end of the year. Kansas City Chiefs, 32% first read target share for DeAndre Hopkins in week 14, 20% for Noah Gray, 16% for Travis Kelce, 12% for Xavier Worthy. Over the past 4 games, 23% for Hopkins, 22% for Kelce, 17% for Gray, 17% for Worthy. Hopkins is averaging over 100 air yards over the past month. That surprised me. I mean, you see him with the end zone targets and stuff like that, but he's actually had a lot of downfield work. 249 out of 406 air yards over the past 4 games have been catchable. You want the route rate to be higher. It feels like it's hard to trust the player who only plays half the snaps, but all the underlying usage is good. If you had an 80% route rate and all of these exact same target and air yardage stats, I think he would probably be like a top 24 receiver in most people's minds. But like we're kind of hesitant to put him in that range because he doesn't play that much. But I mean, this is a four game sample of him like pretty consistently being heavily involved in the offense. And it's, an offense that can be boring at times, but generally puts points on the board. It's going to be near the top in Vegas implied totals every week. So yeah,
difficult passing schedule for the Chiefs in the fantasy playoffs.
That's true. That's true. Some really good cornerback ones that he's going to face. Las Vegas Raiders, 30% first read target rate for Jacoby Myers, 26% for Michael Mayer. That's not the name you're expecting, is it? 15% for Brock Bowers, 15% for Trey Tucker, 68% route rate for Mayer this week. So that is good to see him able to make a return this year. He's a talented young guy. This is a dynasty note. If anything, it didn't affect Bowers' playing time. His route rate was 85%. The target share was down for Bowers. I don't know if that has something to do with Mayer, if that's just a one-game thing. For what it's worth, when Desmond Ridder was in the game, Mayer had 5 targets. So 5 of his 9 targets came from Ridder. 6 out of 10 targets for Jacoby Myers came from Ritter. 3 out of 5 targets for Brock Bowers came from Ritter. That doesn't really tell me anything, but just thought people might want to know that. Sincere McCormick, this will tell you something. 94% RB rush share for Sincere McCormick is about as good as it gets. I mean, it's only 6% away from 100. Los Angeles
yesterday, but the tape was good.
Yeah, I like him. Los Angeles Chargers, 35% first read target share for Josh Palmer, 26% for Quentin Johnston without Ladd McConkey. Stone Smart was next with 13% first read target share. Hopefully that doesn't matter to you, but I mean, Sincere McCormick matters nowadays, so why not Stone Smart? Will Disley, it looks like he's going to miss multiple weeks, so maybe this is something for anyone who might care about this note. I don't know. I'm in a league where you start 2 tight ends. So as a reminder, Ladd McConkey did have a 60% first read target share last time we saw him, 60%. Los Angeles Rams, 52% first read target share for Puka Nacua, almost as high as Ladd McConkey. Not quite. 28% for Cooper Kupp, 12% for Tutu Atwell. It really is everything funneling through the top 2 receivers. Over the past month, 43% for Puka, 31% for Kupp. Kupp has 5 end zone targets over the past month to 2 for Puka. And since Puka has returned, excluding the punch game, he has 4 end zone targets to 5 for Demarcus Robinson and 7 for Kupp. Just thought that was interesting because I do think he has improved at the catch point, but it's definitely Kupp who Stafford has looked for when in scoring distance. Kyren is 12th at the running back position in RB rush share over the past month, which is lower than what we've come to expect for him, but they are getting Blake Corum more involved. But I mean, this past week, we still saw Kyren get a huge workload. Obviously, when your team scores 4 to 4 points, there's a lot of expected fantasy points that will go your way. He was the RB5 in XFP this past game, but over the past month, he is only the RB23 in XFP per game. If you're wondering how that can be possible, it's because he has 3 targets in 4 games over the past month. So you are dealing with kind of thin margins for Kyren, but I think the Rams are going to be putting points on the board. I mean, they just put up 44 points against a pretty good defense. Last night on the Rams, Davis Allen played less than Colby Parkinson. They made him a full-time guy like a month ago and have been scaling it back ever since then because he literally doesn't ever get any targets or catch. He does nothing at all in the stat sheet. And he was barely involved in this game. Miami Dolphins, 34% first read target rate for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, 16% for Devon Achane, 9% for Jonnu Smith. So that's way different than what we've seen for Jonnu. Over the past month, it's 23% for Hill, 22% for Jonnu, 19% for Waddle, 13% for Achane. Achane played a lot more. This was a career high in snaps for him. His route rate was way back up, RB2 on the weekend route rate. So no Raheem Mostert definitely helped him there. Over the past month, I just wanted to bring this up because I think it's another stat that supports that Jalen Waddle is playing really, really well. 207 out of 229 air yards for Waddle have been catchable, which is definitely Tua contributing to that as well. But compared to that to Tyreek, 263 out of 477 air yards for Tyreek Hill. So a much, much higher conversion rate for Waddle. And I do think he's just presenting an open target quite often. When they played a super zone heavy defense, he wasn't very involved. But other than that, he's been more involved lately. And I think he's somebody you might be able to trust down the stretch if you were able to make the playoffs with him. Minnesota Vikings, 53% first read target share for Jordan Addison, 24% for TJ Hawkinson, only 18% for Justin Jefferson. Over the past month, 28% Addison, 27% Jefferson, 19% Hawkinson, 9% Aaron Jones. Early in the year, Jones was getting targeted at a really high rate. That's dropped off. His route rate has been down too. He only ran around on a third of the dropbacks this week. His playing time in general has come down at times because he's been fumbling, but he didn't fumble in this game. He handled 72% of the running back rushes. So I think he's somebody you can still throw into a flex and feel all right about it. It's a good offense. And do you think he's slowed down at all? I haven't noticed that really. I think it's just the fumbles.
I would say it's just the fumbles, but I haven't watched the tape, so I wouldn't know for sure.
All right. New England Patriots, 24% first read target rate for Hunter Henry over the past month, 20% for Kayshon Boutte, 17% for Demario Douglas. Hopefully you don't have to trust any of these guys. Henry is the one, if any. New Orleans Saints, 32% first read target share for Marcus Valdes-Scantling, 23% for Juwan Johnson in week 14. Hopefully you don't have to trust these guys. Don't know what's going to happen with the QB situation.
Yeah.
I was shocked to find out that Alvin Kamara only has an 8% first read target share over the past month. It had been like 15 to 20% prior to that. With all their weapons going down, it makes sense that they would throw to him more, but we haven't seen that. So I just don't really want anything to do with the Saints. Speaking of teams I don't want anything to do with, you know who's next. New York Giants, 31% first read target share for Malik Neighbors in week 14, 28% for Wan'Dale Robinson, 17% for Darius Slayton, 10% for Tyron Tracy, 10% for Bellinger. Over the past month, it's 37% Neighbors, 22% Robinson. Neighbors, I was surprised by this. 191 out of 227 air yards have been catchable for Neighbors. Do you want to contest that stat, Dan?
What would say it again? 127 out of what?
191 out of 277.
That's better than I thought it would be.
Yeah, that's better than I
add
thought.
Up from what I've seen on tape. But
24 out of 30 catchable targets were deemed catchable for Neighbors. So we're looking at like 8-ish catchable targets per game. They're not throwing the ball deep much, which I think makes sense with the line. His average depth of target on these catchable targets is 8 yards. So there just hasn't been very much upside for Neighbors. Like, we're going to get into him when we compare him to some of the receivers around him. It's like, how does he get to a big game? I just don't know how he gets there with this offense. New York Jets, 30% first read target share for Devontae Adams and for Garrett Wilson this past week, 15% for Braylon Allen, 15% for Tyler Conklin. Over the past month, it's 33% for Wilson, 30% for Adams. We're seeing deeper targets for Wilson too, so there's more upside with him, but only about half of his air yards have been catchable. Adams have been shorter targets, have been more catchable. They're about in the same range for me. You can start them if you need to. Philadelphia Eagles, 40% first read target share for A.J. Brown, 40% for Devontae Smith this past week. They're going to pass more this next game, I think, and those two are where the ball is going with Dallas Goedert on IR. I think we'll see more AJB than Devontae Smith most weeks. 40% is really good for Devontae this past week. So if you're desperate, I mean, I've got some dynasty leagues where I have to start him in the playoffs. Maybe there's hope. Pittsburgh Steelers, 29% first read target share for Scotty Miller. There's nothing to report here. They just used a bunch of guys with George Pickens out. Still only 41% route rate for Mike Williams, which is disappointing that even without Pickens, he's just not going to be a full-time.
26 pass attempts too, right?
Yeah. I don't think we're going to see Big Mike be a full-time player at any point. Freiermuth's route rate was 62%. That's not great. Only 3 targets for him. I don't really want to use any of these guys. 49ers, 33% first read target share for Juwan Jennings. I think we're back on track with league winner Juwan. 29% for Kittle, 10% for Debo, 10% for Ricky Pearsall. Over the past month, it's 35% Juwan, 22% Kittle in the games that he's played in, 21% Debo, 17% for Christian McCaffrey. That's really high for a running back. That's a void that is just not really filled at the running back position. So maybe those go to Debo. I don't know. That's the only hope I can give you for Debo. Seattle Seahawks, 32% first read target share for DK Metcalf. So it just continues to be him first. 21% for Jackson Smith and Jigba, 21% for Noah Fant, 16% for Zach Charbonnet. 12-yard average depth of target for JSN in this game. So we've seen more and more of these healthy air yardage kind of games, not so much short stuff lately. Over the past month, 36% first read target share for DK Metcalf. That is really high. If you're a DK person, like that is something you can bank on. It's been high each week. He just hasn't been converting, which is weird because 321 out of his 362 air yards of the past month have been deemed catchable. So for reference, only Quentin Johnston, Nick Westbrook, Akine, T. Higgins, and Xavier Legette have a lower catch rate on catchable targets over the past month than Metcalf. This is why I've been frustrating. Like I try not to get too like emotionally attached to what's going on out there, but sometimes it just like doesn't make any sense to me. And that's kind of where I'm at when I watch this team is like, especially with the Lions struggling, why are we trying to force it to DK down the field on the perimeter so often when JSN seems like he's winning a lot?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just where we're at. And I think it's worth noting for people because like people are really, really excited about Jackson Smith and Jigba right now. And it makes sense. He's played well. Like I tweeted that he's in the top 5 in fantasy points in the year. and it got like 10,000 likes. And it's like, what? Why is this so relevant? But like people, every time I put a ranking set out, people tell me he's too low. And it's, I don't know. Maybe he can keep producing really efficiently, but like the volume does not support there. He seems like a prime regression candidate.
Yeah.
If you look at the underlying volume compared to how he's actually played. So I just wanted to point that out for people. Buccaneers, 27% first read target share for Jalen McMillan, 20% for Mike Evans, 20% for Sterling Shepard, 20% for Cade Otton. Over the past month, it's 30% Evans, 25% Shepard, 13% Otton. So that rate has just really dropped for Otton since Evans has been back. He did have a good game this week, but I don't trust it. For Evans, 225 out of his 278 air yards over the past month have been catchable. He's playing really well, and the connection with him and Baker is just one of the best in the NFL. This past game was a bit frustrating, and you said that he isn't feeling like he's 100%. I think he got it. I think he's locked in. Like the splits without Chris Godwin on the field throughout his career are really good. They're like Tyreek Hill kind of efficiency and target splits. And so I think I'm just locking him in and not really thinking about it, no matter what the matchup is at this point. Okay. Tennessee Titans, 57% first read target share for Calvin Ridley last week. That's really high. 10% for Nick Westbrook-Akine, 10% for Chig Okonkwo. Over the past month, it's 33% for Ridley, 22% for NWI, 15% for Tyler Boyd, 11% for Okonkwo. Just about half of Ridley's air yards have been catchable over the past month. On the year, he has the highest uncatchable air yardage total, but it's been a little bit better lately, and he can have games like this where they like completely funnel things through him. So I think you can use him. I don't know. There's a lot of guys that I really have no idea. Receiver position is just kind of rough. Commanders, they're coming off a bye, but over the past month, Zach Ertz leads the team with a 25% first read target share. I think he is one of the few pass catchers that we know you can trust. We'll see. I don't know. We're talking about Zach Ertz. He's 35 years old. It's just hilarious that that's what we're saying, but the offense has been weird where they're not throwing deep very often, and Ertz just gets a ton of volume, and it feels pretty bankable week to week. But maybe things change out of the bye. Who knows? 25% for him over the past month, 21% for Terry McLaurin over the past month, 19% for Noah Brown over the past month. McLaurin had a really good game last time out, and so I understand people are going to be excited about him. He's had a really good year. But I did want to point out that his first read target share has been below 30% in 6 out of his past 8 games. It's been below 25% in 5 out of the past 8 games. So the volume hasn't been there. It's kind of like Jackson Smith and Jigba, where he's outproducing expectations with the volume that he has here. But he could continue to do that. Him and Jaden Daniels are both really good. Last note was on the running backs, Austin Eckler done for the year. So if Brian Robinson is healthy and ready to go, then I think you can push him into like the top 12 range. One game that Eckler missed previously, B-Rob had a 73% RB rush share. We've seen it get as high as 80 to 85% at times this season. If he's playing that kind of a role for the Commanders, then he's going to be really good for fantasy. The Commanders have a 26-point implied total per Vegas this week. That is just outside of the top 5, but that's the same range as the Vikings and the Chiefs and the Texans and the 49ers. This is a legit offense that's getting a lot of respect from Vegas, and then obviously this week's against the Saints. So start him this week, feel good about that, and see how healthy he is, and then we'll go from there.
Target shares, team by team advanced stats. Hopefully you guys are able to purse through them, dig them out, find little edges there. I found some stuff that's interesting that I'm going to use for my lineups, Jacob, but we have a few minutes left. Let's transition here. Let's talk a little positional start sits. We're going to have to rapid fire through these because we don't have that much time left, but let's start with the quarterback position and the QB1 discussion. We'll go QB1 and QB2 because I know a lot of listeners are sickos like us and they like to mostly play in super flex leagues. That's what I am. So let's talk both positions. Let's start with QB1 decisions to make.
Yeah, so I think the top 4 are locked in with Jalen Hurts being number 5, and then I have Kyler Murray number 6, which is much, much higher than most people, but I do like the matchup for him and Marvin Harrison Jr. and all the Cardinals this week against the Patriots. They have the 3rd highest implied point total on the board. But yeah, Kyler Murray's expert consensus ranking is QB 11. So I have him ahead of Bo Nix, Sam Darnold, Justin Herbert, Brock Purdy, Tua. What do you think about that?
I love it. I mean, Murray does not only have this matchup, which is prime. He has great matchups the rest of the way. I think Dave Richard posted his content for Sportsline, and it's a breakdown of the schedules moving forward. And Murray is the best schedule of any quarterback. So he's somebody I would definitely be happy to have in my rosters right now heading into the playoffs. I also am equally as high on Bo Nix. I love the matchup against the Colts. Like, I think we could be looking at a massive Knicks day.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tua is the guy that I have much lower than
Oh.
consensus, and I didn't mean for him to be that way. He's played really well last 3 weeks. He's been putting up massive numbers. The Dolphins are throwing the ball a ton. Do you think he should be higher? I have him behind Herbert and Purdy because those guys give a little more scrambling upside, and they both could be in shootouts. But Tua's game could be shootout too.
I think I'm with you on that one. Now, like, I'm happy that he's in a dome for this game, but I think the matchup is a lot tougher than what Purdy has. Even like Darnold, I see you have him up there at quarterback 8. I like that ranking too. Chicago's defense hasn't been the same, for a little while now, 3-4 weeks. So I don't really see anyone I could put two ahead of, but I would be confident in starting him.
Okay, so the next guys before we get to this QB2 range that we're talking about for Superflex, these guys are pretty much locked into. Is Jordan Love, sorry, after Tua, we've got Jared Goff, then CJ Stroud, then Jordan Love. I just didn't really see it. They're kind of in a tier of their own where you're probably starting them unless you have one of these other guys that are better. Whereas this next group, it's kind of, I could see it being a toss up for people in Superflex leagues. So we've got Drake May. I always end up much higher than consensus on him. Consensus has him at QB 21. I have him at 15. He's on the road against Arizona coming out of his bye. The guys directly behind him in my rankings, I'm curious if you'd start any of them ahead of Drake May. It's Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes, Anthony Richardson, Matthew Stafford, and Jameis Winston. And Aaron Rodgers. Consensus has all of those guys ahead of May.
I'm gonna go with a no on Mayfield over May. That one I'm strong on. Mahomes at Cleveland, I'm going to have to play over May. Cleveland's pass defense hasn't been as good as expected. Don't love the weather situation and don't love the game script possibility there.
Don't
But
love the tackles trying to block Myles Garrett.
agree, that is actually a massive issue and probably will lead to a ton of quick game for Mahomes. I just think like these Winston games end up in like bigger shootouts than people expect and like more passing production from the other side. If I think about like what Bo Nix did and then what Russell Wilson was able to do. We'll see on that front. I would start May over Richardson. I don't like Richardson in this matchup at all against Denver. Stafford's interesting. San Fran seemed to have fixed some of their issues in the pass defense last week, but Stafford is feeling it. I think I'd still go. I think I'd go Stafford there. Jameis versus KC. KC's been a little more vulnerable, but I think I'd still go May over Jameis. And then after that, it would definitely be May over all the rest.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got Jameis at QB 20 and then Bryce Young directly after him. I think he's played really well. And the Panthers could surprise and put up a big total here against Dallas. I have him ahead of Aaron Rodgers, ahead of Russell Wilson against the Eagles, ahead of Caleb Williams, ahead of Kirk Cousins, Geno, and Will Levis. All right, let's shift over to running back.
Give the listeners a quick fun thing. According to this versus consensus rankings, Jacob is highest on Bryce Young and Drake May this week. Kyler Murray coming in next, and he's lowest versus consensus on Tua. And we talked through all these players, but it's just interesting to wrap it up with this and Baker.
Mm-hmm. At running back, we're looking at the guys outside of the top 8 that aren't quite locked in, and I just wanted to start with Zach Charbonnet and Chuba Hubbard. I have them at RB 9 and 10. Consensus has them at 16 and 18. I have these guys ahead of Kyron Williams, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, Brian Robinson, David Montgomery, Rico Dowdle. Do you agree with all that? I feel like you're high on both.
Oh, man, I'm high on a lot of players here. I am very high on Charbonnet and Hubbard, and it looks like we're going to miss it. It's going to be no Walker for another week. I actually wouldn't put either. I have them over Kyron and Kamara, especially with the quarterback situation there. I think what I might have, though, is them being knocked down 2 spots and popping ahead of them, James Conner and Brian Robinson. I'm super high on both James Conner and Brian Robinson this week from a matchup standpoint, from potentially a game script standpoint as well.
Yeah, that's fair. The Seahawks, for reference, only have a 22-point implied total, which is middle of the pack or even a little bit low, whereas like the Cardinals are at 26.5. So I think that's totally fair. It's just that these guys are out on the field like 100% of the snaps, basically. So So after Connor and B-Rob, I have David Montgomery, then Rico Dowdle, then Rashad White, Tony Pollard, Jonathan Taylor, James Cook. Feels too low on Taylor and Cook, and I guess
But it's
Pollard too.
not.
Pollard, they expert consensus has at 11. I have him at 18. So these
Yeah.
three, I'm much lower the consensus on. Does that feel right to you?
Feels right to me, and I think we're going on a bit of a limb here, but I'm with you on all three of those situations. We talked through Cook already. Taylor, we haven't talked through at length, but I mean, they just really haven't been able to get that run game going. He hasn't been as much of a red zone option as I hoped he'd be. Nothing almost in the passing game. It's something he'd worked on during his NFL career. Pollard's the interesting one, but I don't love that matchup. I know it's good on paper. I just think that game could get out of hand and Cincinnati could take a huge lead.
Yeah, and Tyjae Spears is playing. So yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
and he's playing pretty well. He looks okay out there.
ran more routes than Pollard last week. That's
Yep.
kind of when he's there, I view Pollard as more of like a low end RB2. But yeah, definitely has upside. It could be a shootout. We'll see. All right, wide receivers. Basically, there's a top three tier, and then you've got like Amon St. Brown, Justin Jefferson have been like struggling a little bit, and so I'm curious what you make of these guys. I really wanted to point out three names and see if you think it's fine to have them ranked this high, or if it's totally irresponsible by me, because I do think people are going to be considering like I don't feel comfortable with AJ Brown. Could I start this guy instead? So I have Amon at 4, Jefferson at 5, Jawan Jennings at 6. Consensus has him at 19. Tyreek Hill at 7, AJ Brown at 8, Terry McLaurin at 9, Mike Evans at 10, CeeDee Lamb, Brian Thomas Jr., Lad McConkey, BTJ, McConkey are the other two that are much higher than consensus. T. Higgins, Drake London, Cooper Kupp.
I mean, look, when it comes to Jennings, I'm on your side on this one. We're probably two highest in the industry from a consensus stamp versus consensus. I look at last week and I think, wow, it could have been much bigger. Jennings was wide open on what would have been a long touchdown, but Purdy just didn't throw it early enough. And the ball hung up there and he just had to make I think it was like a 43-yard catch. So that took another, 9-10 points, fantasy points off the board for him. There's just from a target share standpoint, like you broke down, from the fact that that offense moves the ball really well, the matchup against the Rams, there's just all things I like about Jennings, and I have him as high as you do. I think like AJ Brown, for example, could have a squeaky wheel game, like from that standpoint, but like that's like the narrative you look to on the plus side, Jacob. But like the negative side is the matchup is still the Steelers, and Jalen Hurts just isn't seeing the field well, and I don't know if just like squeaky wheel will make it better there. So I have him over him. The rest of those guys, who else did you say? Brian Thomas and McConkey you were curious about?
Yeah, so CeeDee Lamb at 11, then BTJ at 12, McConkey at 13, Higgins at 14. I think I would push Higgins ahead of those two after digging into it a little bit more. But then London and Kupp behind those two
Yes.
rookies.
Yeah, for me too. I London and Cup behind those two rookies and Higgins as well. London, you mentioned still good target share. I just don't think that Cousins is playing good football right now, and I don't want to trust that to put him higher than those players. Lamb, I would only keep up there because of the matchup, so I'm fine with it based on that. But that's again, he scares me at any point. And then Cup, as you mentioned, this offense is now revolving in a lot of ways through Puka.
Yeah. All right. So just a few minutes here. I do want to keep going with the receivers and just look at the next tier because I think this is when we get into tougher decisions. Calvin Ridley is who I have directly after Cup. We've talked about the wide range of outcomes. Him and Cortland Sutton. I think if you want a safer start, you could go with Sutton over him. Khalil Shakir is next for me at 19. You could go with him over Ridley if you want a safer start. But if you're looking for more upside, it's Ridley at wide receiver 17, Jordan Addison at wide receiver 20. And then you got maybe a safer play with like Adam Thielen at wide receiver 21. Jackson Smith and Jigba wide receiver 22. I do think is legitimately kind of like a toss-up, like high upside guy, but I don't feel super safe with it. The Packers do play a ton of zones, so we may see some more looks for him and not as many for Metcalf. But until they like really make a focal point to get him the ball, I think I have him a lot lower than consensus, but I think this is as high as I could push him. I wanted to push him as high as I could, and this is where I landed, was wide receiver 22, behind Adam Thielen, behind Jordan Addison. After those guys, Zay Flowers. Do you have any thoughts on how the Giants defense presents for Baltimore?
It should be a torch
Just
spot.
whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be whatever Lamar wants. Now, Giants defense played well last week, but it was a really good matchup versus the Saints. They did a lot of things like too high and then rotate down really aggressively to stop the run. I'm sure they'll try that against Henry, but then that'll
Yeah.
give Lamar Jackson options to just burn them. And I'll say this, as far as the Giants defense goes, they're just injured across the board. No Dexter Lawrence. Everyone is basically out. That Bobby Okereke, Deontay Banks, they're three best players at each of those positions.
So how about him compared to Calvin Ridley or Jordan Addison or Jackson Smith and Jigba? They're all to me like high range of outcomes, like high volatility, but he probably has the highest ceiling because the Ravens are implied for the highest point total.
He doesn't really score touchdowns. Not that many of those do, except for Addison. I'd have Ridley the lowest by far of all these four.
Interesting. Okay. I love the matchup against Cincinnati for Ridley and the 57%.
And I don't want to bet on Will Levis ever to.
That's fair.
Carry a receiver for me.
After Zay Flowers, I've got the Jets receivers with Adams ahead of Wilson. Marvin Harrison Jr. I have next. Jaden Reed after that. Jalen Waddle, Amari Cooper, Malik Neighbors. Neighbors feels way too low, and it's way lower than consensus. It's a matchup against Baltimore, who has been playing better, but has been definitely beatable by wide receivers. What do you think about this ranking?
Amari
Cooper, Waddle, Jaden Reed.
I would probably have that Waddle, Cooper, Reed.
And Neighbors ahead of those guys?
And then Neighbors. The matchup should be decent for Neighbors, and Locke should be getting better with Neighbors. There was some evidence of that late in the game. They had a back shoulder that almost went for a touchdown, 25 yards down the field. I'll put Neighbors ahead of them just because of some of the stuff we talked about. He's like setting pace for like the rookie target share per out run percentage. Like it's just hard to not play that kind of volume, specifically in PPR leagues.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do think Baltimore's defense has been locked in lately. They're coming out of the bye. It scares me a little bit.
Better.
I think they're going to put pressure on Locke, and it just could be like awful.
It could be awful. Yeah,
it could be one of those days.
Yeah, that's what it was for like the first half of the game against the
Whereas
Saints.
These other guys are all in offenses that are in the top third, fourth of the league. You know, Buffalo, Miami, Green Bay, Arizona. I just would rather trust those guys, honestly. I just think that's a good point to end on here is like, you're in the playoffs, you know, like I guess if you really feel like you're at a disadvantage, you're facing some juggernaut, then sure, go with Neighbors. But I don't want to trust him here, man.
I know.
And even like the guys after him, I think you could go with Jacoby Myers over him. I think you could go with Jerry Jeudy, Darnell Mooney over him.
I would still go Neighbors, though. I want to be clear about that, but I understand the logic behind what you're saying.
Yeah. It's tough. To me, he's in the same range as like Cooper, Jaden Reed, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, where it's like, I got no clue what to expect from these guys. Jamison Williams should be above him, I think. He's in this range. He's against the Bills, who don't give up a lot of deep passing, but that's not really the way they're using him, you know? Like, I don't know. Like, huge shootout potential. I think I would rather just trust JMO.
I'm staying with Neighbors over JMO.
Yeah, that's fair.
Maybe
you want to wrap here?
Yeah, let's wrap. We got both got to jump, but thank you so much for tuning in to the Beyond the Box Score podcast. Almost
newsletter.
Out with
all the rankings will be in the newsletter. I'll basically do this podcast on Friday where I like go through flex position, like positional stuff for start sit, and just try to give you a better idea of like why I would go this way, who to go with if you want more upside, all that kind of stuff.
And do us a favor, please hit the like button right now. Hover your hand over that mouse. Hover your mouse over the like button. Hit that like button. We need your help. Like and comment. Any kind of like. Just do it. It takes 3 to 5 seconds, and it really makes a difference for us. But yeah, check out Jacob's newsletter. Obviously, if you haven't already, subscribe to that. And if you are not getting the newsletter and you've tried to subscribe, please DM me on Twitter. I'm compiling a list of these emails and looking into fixing that before it's too late. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week.
Let's get some wins. It's playoff time, baby.
Get some wins. It's playoff time. Have a good rest of your week.